Prince William gets angry as Queen Camilla and his son try to control Prince Louis after he publicly exposed their secret. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next. Prince William's fury was unlike anything the palace had seen from him before. For years he had built a reputation as the calm and measured heir, the royal who never lost his composure, even under the most intense public pressure. But in the privacy of Kensington Palace, away from cameras and carefully written statements, that composure shattered. The moment the door closed behind him after the family briefing, his restraint gave way to the frustration that had been building for far too long. William's anger wasn't impulsive, it was layered, rooted in years of silent endurance. The revelation that his own son had publicly exposed something so sensitive was painful, yes, but it was the circumstances behind it that cut deepest. He knew his son's words hadn't come from nowhere. Someone had spoken freely enough within palace walls for Louis to absorb and repeat. That realization wasn't just embarrassing, it was a betrayal. For William, whose entire adult life had been spent protecting his children from the mistakes of the past, this moment felt like the one thing he feared most. History repeating itself in front of his eyes. He had spent much of his life managing royal image, keeping his family's public and private lives in delicate balance. Every word his children said, every public appearance they made was coordinated with careful thought, not to stifle them, but to protect them. The memory of his mother's torment under media scrutiny still haunted him. He knew what it meant for a royal child to grow up surrounded by lies, manipulation, and press intrusion. He had promised himself that his own children would be free from that. Yet now here, he was forced to watch his son become the center of a media firestorm. When the first reports hit the press, William's phone didn't stop ringing. Advisors, friends, even old confidants tried to reach him, but he refused to take calls. He sat in silence, watching the news unfold on a muted television. Every time he saw Louis's image appear next to headlines hinting at family secrets, the anger twisted deeper inside him. It wasn't anger at Louis, but at those who had let this happen, at those who had created an environment where a child could overhear discussions meant for the most private of rooms. Camilla's name appeared in nearly every article. The phrasing varied, but the implication was the same. She had overstepped. Queen Camilla's influence questioned after Prince Louis's comments, read one headline. Another went further. Royal sources suggest tension between Queen Consort and Prince of Wales. To the outside world, these were just stories, speculation meant to feed public fascination. But for William, they were personal attacks, reopening the wounds of the past that never truly healed. When he finally met with his closest aides, his frustration was evident. "This isn't about a comment," he said, pacing across the room, his voice tight but controlled. "This is about control. It's about trust. Someone allowed this to happen, and I want to know who." The room fell silent. No one dared to speak. They had seen him angry before, but this was different. It wasn't an outburst. It was cold, calculated fury. In another part of the palace, Camilla was handling the crisis in her own way. Where William's anger was emotional, hers was strategic. She knew the danger of letting a story like this spiral. It wasn't just about Louis's words, it was about perception. The media had a long memory, and she could already sense the old narratives returning. Whispers of her being manipulative, of overstepping boundaries, of exerting quiet control behind the scenes. It had taken her decades to rebuild her image after the years of scandal surrounding Charles and Diana. Now, one child's off, and comment threatened to unravel it all. Camilla reached out to her team and to the king's advisors, insisting that the situation be handled with tact. Her message was clear. The focus needed to shift away from her and toward the innocence of a child. "Louis is a boy," she told one aide. "Children say things they don't understand. We mustn't make him a victim of the press." On the surface, it sounded like compassion, but behind those words was calculation. Camilla understood that defending Louis publicly would make her appear gracious, the forgiving grandmother rather than the scheming queen. It was a narrative she could use to her advantage, but William saw through it. To him, it wasn't empathy. It was strategy. He believed that Camilla's sudden compassion was a move to control the narrative before he could. It was as though she had already anticipated his reaction and was shaping public opinion to paint herself as the peacemaker and him as the overprotective father who overreacted. It was a familiar game, one he had seen play out between his parents decades ago. He confided in Catherine that night, pacing in their private quarters as he tried to make sense of the unfolding chaos. "This is how it starts," he said quietly, his voice breaking with exhaustion. "They make you the villain. They twist everything until you start questioning your own judgment." Catherine listened in silence. She knew better than to interrupt when his thoughts came like this, sharp, fast, and filled with the weight of memory. When he finally stopped speaking, she simply said, "Then we don't play their game. We protect Louis. That's all that matters." Her words grounded him. Catherine had always been his anchor, calm, logical, and unshaken by palace politics. She reminded him that their responsibility wasn't to control the press or the courtiers, but to their children. Yet, even as she said it, they both knew the situation was far beyond family boundaries. Now, the monarchy was a machine, and once a story entered its gears, it took on a life of its own. Over the next few days, William's frustration evolved into resolve. He began to investigate quietly, speaking with those he trusted to understand how much of what Louis had said was known within the palace. The answers he received unsettled him. It turned out that certain discussions about Camilla's growing influence, particularly over King Charles's decision-making, had been circulating for months. There were rumors that she had pushed for more involvement in certain royal engagements, even in matters that traditionally fell under William and Catherine's domain. It wasn't treasonous, but it was intrusive, and it was exactly the kind of thing that would have angered him even without his son's public revelation. The more William learned, the more convinced he became that Louis's comment had struck a nerve because it was rooted in truth. He realized that the real problem wasn't the child's words. It was what they revealed about the structure of control within the family. Camilla's subtle influence, her ability to shape conversations behind closed doors, had gone unchecked for too long. At the same time, the public's fascination with the story continued to grow. Commentators debated whether William's silence was a sign of dignity or disapproval. Some tabloids painted him as the stern father trying to contain his son's outburst. Others suggested a deeper family rift. Each narrative carried its own consequences, and each one chipped away at the carefully maintained image of royal unity. Camilla, still operating behind the scenes, made sure that her allies within the press released stories portraying her in a sympathetic light. Sources close to the Queen Consort began appearing in articles describing her as a misunderstood figure, unfairly targeted by speculation. She made subtle references to her affection for all of Charles's grandchildren, including Louis, calling him a bright-spirited boy. To the public, it sounded like kindness. To William, it sounded like deflection. He could see the pattern emerging again, how the palace machinery worked to protect certain figures while others bore the brunt of public scrutiny. And he refused to let his son become collateral damage in another round of royal damage control. For years, he had been preparing for the day he would take the throne. But this crisis reminded him that leadership within the monarchy wasn't just about duty or ceremony. It was about defending what was right, even from within. One night, after a long day of meetings and briefings, William stood alone in his study, staring at a framed photo of his mother on the wall. He thought of how she had been silenced, misunderstood, and portrayed by the same institution she had once served. He thought about the times he had promised himself that he would do things differently, and as the city outside his window fell into darkness, he made a silent vow. This time, he wouldn't let the palace win. By the end of that week, the atmosphere inside Kensington Palace had shifted completely. William no longer hid his frustration during meetings. His tone was sharp, his demands clear. He wanted full transparency from every department connected to the communications office. He wanted to know exactly how the story had been handled, who had leaked what, and why there had been no coordinated defense of his son. His team, though loyal, could feel his anger simmering beneath every word. Meanwhile, Camilla's camp continued to operate with quiet efficiency. She had her allies positioned in key places, court orders, journalists, and even old friends within royal circles, who ensured her version of events remained dominant. But while she controlled the narrative outside, she couldn't control what was brewing inside. William was no longer the composed prince she could maneuver around. He was a father protecting his child, and that made him unpredictable. In private, William and Camilla's relationship reached a breaking point. During one tense meeting in Clarence's house, their conversation turned from polite disagreement to open confrontation. William questioned her involvement in certain royal decisions, while Camilla insisted she was only trying to maintain family unity, but her tone carried a subtle challenge, one that William couldn't ignore. The argument ended abruptly, with William leaving the room before the discussion could escalate further. For the first time in years, the line between personal resentment and institutional loyalty had been crossed. The heir to the throne and the queen consort were now at odds, and though the world didn't yet know it, the monarchy was entering one of its most fragile moments in recent memory. William's fury, once contained, had turned into purpose. He no longer wanted to simply react. He wanted to understand the full scope of what had happened, and to ensure it would never happen again. The fire that began with one child's innocent words had now become something far greater, a reckoning within the palace itself. And though the world continued to speculate, none could see the deeper truth that beneath the surface of royal politeness, a battle for trust, control, and legacy was already underway. The aftermath of Prince William's confrontation with Queen Camilla left the palace shrouded in a tension that was both unspoken and unmistakable. Behind the gilded walls and perfectly curated smiles, alliances were shifting. Old wounds were quietly reopening, and whispers of a new royal rift began to echo through corridors that had long thrived on secrecy. What had begun as a minor scandal, a child's off-hand remark, was evolving into something far deeper, something that struck at the very foundation of the modern monarchy. William, who had long been known for his discipline and restraint, now found himself pulled into a storm he could neither ignore nor fully control. For years he had worked to separate his family from the internal politics that had consumed his parents' generation. He wanted the monarchy he would someday inherit to be one of unity, not manipulation, a monarchy that learned from the mistakes that destroyed Diana's peace. But in the wake of recent events, he was forced to confront the truth he had long tried to deny. Power within the royal family was never evenly distributed. Camilla had become a force of her own making. Through decades of patience and persistence, she had not only survived public scandal, but reshaped her image into one of reluctant grace. Yet beneath that carefully crafted exterior was a woman who understood influence better than most. She knew how to navigate the machinery of the monarchy, how to build quiet loyalty through charm, how to secure allies by appearing vulnerable, and how to control a narrative without ever seeming to do so. To the public, she was the dutiful consort who stood faithfully beside King Charles. To those inside the palace, she was far more calculating than she led on. In the weeks following the incident, William began to see signs of her influence everywhere. Small things, subtle changes in tone or phrasing during royal briefings, decisions made in the king's name, but bearing Camilla's unmistakable touch. Invitations to engagements that once included Catherine and himself were now redirected or delayed. Advisors who had once reported directly to William were now meeting with intermediaries. None of these things were major in isolation, but together they painted a picture of quiet encroachment, one that William could no longer ignore. Catherine saw it too. Though she rarely spoke publicly about internal matters, she was acutely aware of how power moved within the family. Her instincts had always been sharp, her observations precise. "It's not just what she says," she told William one night, their voices hushed as they sat by the fire in their private quarters. "It's how she positions herself. She's inserting herself into things that were never hers to handle." William nodded, staring into the flames. "She's testing how far she can go. And father, he doesn't see it. Or maybe he doesn't want to." King Charles, ever the diplomat, was caught between the two most significant figures in his life, his wife and his son. To him, Camilla's involvement was not interference, but assistance. He viewed her as a partner in governance, someone who could handle the emotional weight of the role while he managed the institutional demands. What he failed to see was how her growing influence alienated his heir, creating a fracture in the very line of succession he was meant to secure. For William, the issue was not merely personal, it was constitutional. As heir, he had certain duties, responsibilities, and expectations within the institution. But when Camilla began to blur the lines of authority, it became clear that those duties were being undermined. Every time she bypassed him to speak directly with the king about royal matters, it wasn't just a breach of etiquette, it was a challenge to his position. The tension finally reached its breaking point during a private family gathering at Balmoral. The gathering was meant to be a time of quiet reflection, an opportunity for the family to appear united after weeks of public speculation. Yet, from the moment William arrived, he sensed the atmosphere was strained. Conversations were clipped. Polite smiles concealed irritation, and even the staff moved with a careful unease. Over dinner, Charles tried to bridge the gap. "We've had a difficult few weeks," he began, his voice soft but deliberate. "But we must remember that the strength of this family lies in our ability to move forward together." William listened, his expression unreadable. "Together," he repeated quietly. "That's what I've always wanted." Camilla interjected, her tone gentle but pointed. "And we will, William, but that means putting certain misunderstandings behind us. None of this should divide us." It was a diplomatic statement, but one laced with insinuation. To anyone else, it might have sounded conciliatory. To William, it sounded like dismissal, a veiled attempt to minimize the very issue that had torn open the family's unity. "What's dividing us," he said calmly, "isn't misunderstanding, it's interference. It's people overstepping their place." The room went silent. Even Charles, who had been trying to maintain peace, looked taken aback. Camilla straightened in her chair, her polite composure tightening into something sharper. "If you're referring to me," she said evenly, "then I think that's unfair. Everything I've done has been for this family, for your father, for father, or for yourself," William replied. The question hung in the air like a blade. No one spoke. Charles, clearly uncomfortable, looked between his wife and his son, his expression a mix of frustration and sorrow. "Enough," he finally said. "We will not do this here." But the damage was already done. The conversation that followed was short and stilted, and when the evening ended, the family dispersed without another word. That night, William left Balmoral earlier than planned, his departure noted, but not questioned. He didn't speak to his father again for several days. Back in London, the story began to leak, not directly, but through whispers, the kind that always seemed to find their way into the press. Sources close to the royal family reported tension between the Prince of Wales and the Queen Consort. Though the details were vague, the implication was clear. There was trouble within the family. William suspected the leap came from someone within Camilla's camp. It was subtle enough not to seem targeted, but damaging enough to make him appear unyielding and difficult. Catherine urged restraint. "If we react publicly, it only fuels them," she said. "Let the storm pass." But William wasn't sure he could. Every day, he saw his mother's story repeating itself in small, familiar ways. The same manipulation, the same calculated leaks, the same attempts to control perception through charm and half-truths. The same cycle that had destroyed her peace was now creeping into his life. Meanwhile, Camilla continued to play her role flawlessly. In public, she smiled and joked with the king during engagements, radiating warmth and unity. In private, she ensured her influence remained unchallenged. She met with trusted advisors, coordinated key press briefings, and kept a careful eye on any narrative that could harm her standing. To her, William's anger was a problem of perception, not power. "He's emotional," she told a close aide. "He'll calm down, they always do." But this time she was wrong. William wasn't calming down, he was preparing. He began to quietly build his own circle of loyalists within the institution, people who had grown frustrated with the old guard that surrounded the king. These were younger aides, forward-thinking courtiers, and communications officers who believed in modernization. They shared William's vision for a monarchy that was more transparent, less burdened by the internal politics that had plagued it for generations. Within weeks, this quiet reorganization began to shift the balance of power. Camilla noticed it almost immediately. Certain communications no longer passed through her preferred channels. Meetings she had once been informed about were now held without her knowledge. The palace machine was changing shape, and though she tried to contain it, the shift was undeniable. Behind the scenes, the king sensed the growing divide, but felt powerless to bridge it. His health, already fragile, had made him more dependent on those closest to him. Camilla managed his schedule and shielded him from stress. William, on the other hand, was focused on preparing for the inevitable future, a future where he would lead, not merely support. The two approaches were incompatible, and the tension between them was reaching a point of no return. By early autumn, the divide had become impossible to ignore. Publicly, the family maintained its image of unity. Privately, there were two centers of power within the palace, one surrounding the king and Camilla, the other forming quietly around the Prince and Princess of Wales. Advisors began to choose sides, some out of loyalty, others out of foresight. Everyone could sense what was coming, and beneath it all, the old ghosts lingered. The memory of Diana, the shadows of betrayal, the weight of an institution built on appearances. William knew that if he wasn't careful, he could become trapped in the same cycle his mother had endured. Yet, unlike her, he wasn't willing to suffer in silence, this time.